Welcome to Richer Soul, Stu Crum. It's great to have you join us today.
Rocky, I'm thrilled to be here and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
And I am excited to learn from you. We always start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
I'm very fortunate in that I grew up in a family. It was an upper middle class family. Father was college educated, mother was college educated, brothers were older, went off to college. So I was taught the value of money, um, and the value of working hard for money at a very early age. So I would say that my parents and both mother and father and brothers really made me fairly money literate. I'm not sure if that's a real term, but let's call it a term for the sake of this conversation. By the time I was 18 years old, I'd already had a couple jobs and knew how to bank and all those kinds of good things.
So I'm assuming your parents were intentional with that.
They were very intentional. They were. They were.
Do you know what drove that intentionality? Because it's not the norm.
No, my father, who's still alive and who will be listening to this podcast, by the way, is 92 years old. My mother's still alive; she's 90. He did not grow up in the Great Depression, but I think that was an era of people who were very money wise and knew the value of the dollar. I think generations thereafter are probably a little less money wise and know the value of the dollar. And I think that's probably why part of it's an age thing where, I think folks that grew up in that era just, at least in my mind, thought and were intentional about trying to teach your children things, the right and wrongs of spending money.
You're just a little bit ahead of me. I know my parents taught me about money. I thought that was normal, but when I got older, I realized most people weren't taught about money at home. College and my MBA didn't teach me about money.
No, that's for sure. I agree with that. But you know what is interesting about that? So what I wasn't taught is how to invest money, right?
Hmm.
So I was taught the value of spending money wisely, saving money. I started cutting a lawn when I was 13, 14 years old. Stu, save your money, et cetera, et cetera. What I taught my children, so let's now fast forward to, I actually was very intentional in raising my children, who are now grown, very grown adults, about money. And we talked about investments at an early age because I think I was maybe just a little more sophisticated and thought about it a little more than maybe my parents did.
Yeah, and the world of investing is dramatically different because I remember when I was young, if you wanted to buy stocks, you had to call up a stockbroker, and a trade was $350, and you really can't do a lot of investing when trading costs are that high, and money wasn't worth what it is today.
Yeah, fair enough.
Three
And,
hundred
and,
and
and you're right.
fifty was a big chunk to pay. Today, hell, you can do it, I think, on your iPhone for free.
Right, exactly right, exactly right. No, that's I've never thought about that, and that's probably the reason why. His
Yeah.
investment was through his 401k and through his stockbroker, but we never had those conversations.
No, that would make sense. So, how did you get into football?
So, family of four boys, mother an all-state softball player at 5'2", ironically. She was a third baseman. Father an all-state football player at 5'9", but that's back. You didn't have to be huge to be a, once again, he's almost 100 years old. And so I grew up in a family just loved sports. Where I gravitated, we happened to live in Dallas, Texas at the time. My father was in a pharmaceutical business. We got transferred. We were moved to Dallas, and our next door neighbors were from England. And the next door neighbor, along with Lamar Hunt, who is what used to be the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs, and his family still is, started a soccer league in Dallas, Texas when I was 6 years old. I played on the very first formal soccer league in Dallas. My father had no idea what soccer was even about. He was a football player. I mean, literally had no idea what soccer was about. But we grew up playing all these sports. Soccer was one of them. Soccer helped me then move to become a place kicker in football. I'm the first generation of American place kickers that actually, weren't that well, if by the mere fact of American was grew up in the United States that played soccer and kicked a football. All those that preceded me were ones that actually came from foreign countries, right? They came from overseas. They were soccer players from overseas and then brought the soccer style kicking to the United States. So that's really how I evolved. I love football. I was a soccer player. I was going to be 5'7". I wasn't going to be a linebacker. I chose to be a kicker.
That would have been right around the time of Pele, or was Pele right after you?
No, it was Pele. I got to see Pele play the Tulsa Roughnecks with the New York Cosmo in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So sure enough, that was the time of Pele.
Okay, because I remember that was what brought soccer to him. He
Right.
popularized soccer in
He
America, I
he
think.
popularized it. Yep.
Yeah, and partially that, and I don't know if it was then or later, parents moved to soccer because of this whole, we don't want our kids to get hurt.
Yeah.
Mind you, soccer is
Concussions.
not, soccer
Yeah.
has tons of concussions too, but
You're
it
right.
seemed like a smart idea.
Yeah, it was probably that was right around. So you're talking about late '70s, early '80s when Pele came to the United States, played for the Cosmos, and yeah, you're absolutely right that is kind of. I by the way was the exception to the rule playing soccer in 1966. Very few people played soccer, but it fortunately for me, I learned at a very early age, learned how to kick a soccer ball at an early age, which transitioned to kicking a football, and the transition was very easy for me.
And I know because in reading your book, which we'll get to, it seems that there were instances in your childhood, and some of them were probably football related, developed grit. Is that the right way to say
Yeah,
it? Within
grit.
you.
Yeah, grit's one of my eight keys to being intentional. Number 7 is grit. You're absolutely right. Yeah, and I'll explain that to you. So as an athlete, and I think it doesn't matter what sport. It doesn't matter if you're in fencing or if you're in football, if you're in soccer, or if you're in diving. I think that the most successful athletes have grit because either you're unsuccessful trying it one time and you try and try and try again until you perfect whatever it is sport that you're at, right? And that takes grit. I mean, it literally takes kind of a can-do attitude. I call it the X factor a lot. I talk about the X factor in my book. And those athletes don't end up having that X factor, which is grit is a form of, don't usually achieve greatness.
They don't. And it's surprising. I heard this a long time ago. They said that when you're looking at kids getting recruited from high school to college sports, the A players and the ones that all the coaches rate as the A players tend not to do anywhere near as well as the B and C players on the teams. And the reason why is the A players had natural talent until that time, and they
Right.
never ever developed grit. And when they come up against something hard, they crumble. The
Yeah.
B and C players just are out there time and time again working hard. And because you're working hard, you consistently compound your
Sure.
efforts. And so you get better and better. And so while people may not respect you at that moment, it's that consistency of growth that carries you through.
Yeah, I don't disagree with I actually I 100% agree with what you just explained. I think though, and I have a real live example with my son. So I was a professional football player, plays here. My son was a professional baseball player, and he was a kid that I could tell at 2 years old he was an athlete. I knew he was an athlete. I married a woman that was 3 inches taller than me, so I knew he had a chance to be a different athlete, right? He is. He's 6'1", right? I'm 5'7". So, and but he never had that X factor but at 14 years old, he got it. And so up until then, I saw this great athlete that, quite frankly, was just good, but he didn't really try that hard and work that hard. What happened with him is at 14, the light bulb came on. He said, I can be really good if I really work hard. And then he started outworking the kids that might have been as good as him and then passed him pretty quickly because of that grit, right? So that's why I say I agree with you. It just depends on when you get that. Some kids that hit you at 12, some kids that hit you at 18, some never hit you. And that's why they never become great. Fortunately, in my case with my son, it actually I saw the transformation in front of my eyes. I saw a kid with a great athlete that wanted to go paintballing. And then all of a sudden, boom, he said, man, I thought baseball pretty well. I should probably do this, and figured it out and spent his life in the weight room and doing the things you need to do to be successful.
And that's what no one talks about, doing the
Right.
things behind the scenes that nobody sees that allows you to achieve that. Now, you went on, you played college football, and you
I
made it
did.
to the pros.
Yeah, I did. Very fortunate. I got a full scholarship back in 1978, which once again, kickers, everybody else was giving scholarships. Most kickers weren't given scholarships back in the late 70s. I got a full ride to the University of Tulsa, which is the smallest Division I school, but we played Florida, Florida State, Oklahoma State, played big schools. So I got to play against big time opponents. My senior year, I had a coach by the name of John Cooper, who ended up being the head coach for Ohio State, I think, for 12, 13 years. When John passed the 50-yard line, John loved to kick. And so I was fortunate because my senior year in college, I led the nation in field goal attempts. Now, notice I didn't say field goals. I said field goal attempts. I was third in the nation in field goals. And then I was drafted by the New York Jets. Now, I like a lot of people back in 1983 when that draft took place, the USFL came around. And for only the older listeners would remember the USFL, young listeners wouldn't know it. But, there were people like Donald Trump, and I could, very rich, or people who thought they were rich, had a lot of bot teams in the USFL to compete against the NFL. And about 40% of the guys drafted in the NFL, my class, actually jumped to the USFL. I was one. So I did play professional football in the USFL. I went back to the NFL my third year, and I ended up getting cut. So fortunate to play professional football. Didn't make a career out of it, but I learned an awful lot from it.
I've been to USFL games. I think, was Herschel Walker in USFL?
You bet. He was New Jersey Generals.
Yep.
He was a star. He was a star.
And I grew up in Jersey, so we went
There
to
you
see
go.
them.
Well, and I tell you, my quarterback was a guy named Doug Williams. You probably know that name. Doug left the Oklahoma, so first round draft choice, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, left the NFL, come to the USFL, was our quarterback, went on to the Washington Redskins. He was the first African-American quarterback to win a Super Bowl, right? So if you take a look at Doug Flutie, Jim Kelly, you take a look at the great players in the NFL, a lot of them came out of the USFL because at the time, they were paying about double the money that the NFL was paying, and all of us were poor, and it sounded like a good idea.
You never know what's going to happen. You got to follow it. So you come out, have a little bit of a football career, and then you actually had an exceptional work career, kind of working your way up all the way to president of Bridgestone Tire, correct?
President of Jiffy Lube. I'm a 3-time now CEO of private equity-backed companies. So I've been very, very fortunate and blessed the last 15 years of my career, 15, 20 years of my career, leading small and large companies.
And we'll talk about one part of it, but the one thing that impressed me was throughout that whole journey, I know what it takes to move up the ranks, especially in corporate and what you have to do. You always put family first.
I did.
And your kids first throughout that. Where did that drive come from within you?
You asked how I learned about money for my family. I will tell you, it was my parents. My father was in the pharmaceutical business. My mother was a school teacher. And my father traveled a lot. But I remember as a young man, and I remember this distinctly, every game that I was at, I had my parents in the stands. And and there was 4 boys, so I don't know, they weren't always in the stands because 4 boys playing 4 different sports possibly at the same time. They couldn't have been in the same place, right? But I knew that. And so when I got married, my wife and I were very intentional about the way, when we decided to have children, we were very intentional about the way we raised our children and supported our children. And I like to share with people, I love the game of golf. But I gave it up. And I gave it up because in my mind, you can't be a great golfer, which takes about 6 hours. You get there and practice, you play 4 hours, you stay afterwards a little bit. I didn't think I could be a great father and be a great golfer at the same time. And so my priority has always been my children in my life. And so, for 25 years, I never really picked up a golf club because I was intentional about raising the children. And so it was a very conscious effort from a very early start of our marriage that when we had children, they would become a priority. And that becomes hard because you grew up in the corporate world as well. There's a lot of demand for your time. And so you've got to make choices even at work. And let me just answer one question you didn't ask, but I tell you, this is a great example. Back in 1991, I got my first real leadership role. I was running about 120 stores for Texaco. And that was back before there were laptops. So I would actually go to work for 8 or 9 hours. I'd come home. I'd have dinner with the family. I'd put the kids to bed, bathe them, put them to bed. And then I'd kiss my wife goodnight, and I'd go back to the office because that's where my computer was, and I'd finish my work for the day, right? And it was always very intentional because I knew that I wanted and my children need to have a father in their life. I just had to figure out how to be in their life with the demands of my time.
And when you're intentional and you prioritize, you can figure out how to make it happen.
You can. You can. And I think you just said the word prioritize. We're doing great. So I talk about 8 things of intentional living, and you've already caught grit, and priority is my second one. And you do have to prioritize, because if you don't prioritize, the winds of change will have you doing all kinds of different things, and you become good at nothing because you're trying to do all kinds of different things. You got to make things your priority. My priority was a great marriage. I've been married 40 years now. A great family. Got 2 really neat kids that are now adults. I'm a grandfather now to their children, and a a somewhat successful business career.
Congratulations on all of that.
Thank you.
So let's chat about the book. What inspired you to write the book, Aim for the Uprights?
Yeah. So I really had no intention 2 years ago of even writing a book. But I'll tell you what happened. I got into a negotiation to sell the company that I was running at the time. It was a car wash business. Goldman Sachs was the owner. I was also an owner of the business and the CEO. And we were negotiating this deal with a number of different companies. Circle K ended up buying it. And they wanted to get into the car wash business. You get to know people really well in negotiations, sometimes good, sometimes not so good, because they can be pretty heated. One of the people on their deal team said, Stu, you've had a fascinating life. You should write a book. That then spurred me to something that I have said my entire life as the metaphor for my life, which is aim for the upright. Now, I'll share the story with you. So 1983, it's 2 weeks before the NFL draft. And as I had mentioned, I was one of the top 3 ranked kickers in the United States. Thought my chances of being drafted were pretty good. Had gone to the combines. Combines are very different back 40 years ago than they are today. They're not on ESPN Live. Went to the different combines. Teams saw me kick. The New York Giants in particular showed an interest in me. So the special teams coach actually flew to Tulsa, came out to our field, and said he wanted to see me kick. He actually put 10 footballs on the 30-yard line from hash mark to hash mark, which would make it a 40-yard field goal. And I thought, this is great. He's letting me kick chip shots. I'd kicked a 58 and 57-yard field goal my senior year. 40 yards seemed pretty short to me. Snapper holder out there, snapped the ball, hold it. And before I took my swing of my leg, he said, Stu, I know you're getting ready to kick that ball through the goalpost, but I don't want you to kick it through the goalpost. I actually want you to hit the right upright. And I said, what? He said, no, I'm serious. I want you to hit the right upright. And for those who aren't football fans, the uprights, there's a goalpost that goes about 30 feet in the air. Goalposts are about 3 inches in diameter. 40 yards out and 3 inches in diameter is like hitting a needle in a haystack. It's hard to hit. But I wanted to play in NFL, so by golly, I took the swing, I hit the ball, kicked the ball, and believe it or not, the very first kick hit the right upright. The coach had never seen it happen. I knew for a fact I could never do that again. But I was elated, and I started high-fiving all the people who were out watching me kick, and the coach said, Stu, don't get too excited. You got to kick 9 more. And I kicked 9 more, and I missed, of course, the next 9, like I knew I would. But after my little session ended, and before I kicked more, he said to me, Stu, why do you think I asked you to do that? Coach, no idea. He says, well, here's what we have learned in the NFL watching kids coming to the U.S., coming from college. He says, we've noticed all you guys are aiming for the goalpost. And if you miss a little bit right of that goalpost, a little bit left of it, you've actually missed the field goal. What we're teaching our kickers in the NFL is you're finding a very small spot in the middle of that goalpost. And that's what you aim for. So if you happen to miss 3 feet to the right or 3 feet to the left, you're still within the goalpost. You made your 3 points. He said, Stu, your whole life, you've been aiming for good. I don't want you to aim for good. I want you to aim for great. And so that became the metaphor for my life. My intentional living, everything is whatever we do, and we talked about this already, whether it's my marriage, whether it's in my parenting, whether it's in business, whatever I do, I aim for greatness, not just to be good. And so I knew that if I ever wrote a book, that would become the title of my book because of the lesson I learned at 23 years old, 2 weeks before the NFL draft. It was a great lesson for me that I have carried on for the last 42 years.
And I love that because it's really designed to see, because at that point you can tell how close you are and how consistent you are to the target,
Sure.
right?
Right. That's the point.
I mean, let's face it, it was 120 feet at 3 inches.
Yeah. 120 feet at 3 inches. Yeah.
And
40 yards, 3 feet. Yeah, very good.
Yeah. I'm a numbers guy, in case you didn't know that.
I've never, I knew that. I just never done that. You know what? This is really funny. I have never figured out how many feet it is. I never thought about how many feet it is. I've always talked in yards. So I guess my 58-yard field goal would have been a lot of feet. Yeah,
it would have been a lot of feet.
Yeah.
I don't know if people really think in yards, right? The only thing we do in yards in America is football and carpet.
That's right.
Nothing else.
You're right. But as a place kicker, you think in yards, right? That's really funny. Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
I guess golf too, right? Golf is in yards.
No, golf's in yards.
So feet.
Internationally, it's in meters. No, it's in yards, except on the putting green. Putting green, it's in feet.
It's in
Driving,
feet.
it's in yards.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But it allows you then to see how consistent you are, how close you are, and how much control you truly have.
Right. And I think, yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that's what he was looking for. He was looking
Mhm.
to see how close the Stu can get the upright because he saw my stats. He knew I could put the ball through the goalpost. I'd done that a number of times in my senior year in college. But he wanted to see how accurate I was going to be. And fortunately, I hit the first one. And then I was very accurate the next 9. Now, ironically, they didn't draft me. The New York Jets drafted me, not the New York Giants. But be that as it may, I think that was a great lesson for me. Not just athletically, by the way, not just athletically. For the rest of my life and everything I did.
I think the important thing is you learned it. For all the other people he asked that to, I wonder how many learned the lesson.
You know, it'd be interesting if you fast forward now, because when I decided to name the book "Aim for the Uprights," I first Googled, "Is there anything out there aim for the uprights?" And there was nothing out there. All there was a story about Tucker. What's Tucker's name? He's the kicker for Baltimore, one of the best kickers in the NFL right now. And what he does before games is he gets on the goal line and he kicks at the upright before the game. That is his warm up, one of his warm ups before he starts going out and kicking through the. So that's the only thing that I'd seen about that. But obviously, the coach of the New York Giants 42 years ago, every kicker that he was trying out prior to the draft was asking to hit the upright, right? So it wasn't anything new, but interesting enough. I never really heard another story about it until about 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
When we were coaching soccer, sometimes we would have the guys shoot for the crossbar.
Right.
Again,
That's
really, it forces them to narrow
right.
their aim.
It does. Oh boy, does it teach you. And I'm a soccer player, so I get that. I get that. Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's funny because this brings up kind of what my next question is, and you talk about it in the book. Most people live their life kind of on automatic or in the drift.
Mm-hmm.
And so they rarely soar through the uprights because they don't even, and you're saying uprights, you're not even talking post.
Yeah, right.
So they're not even, they're not even in the end zone. Let's call it that.
Sure. Sure.
They're wandering aimlessly through life. Is that what you've seen as well?
It is, and I think that became when I started writing this book. After I had that conversation with the gentleman from Circle K, after I started writing the book, I started off as a leadership book. It was clearly going to be business leadership. 5-time CEO, run some large corporations. I think I can help some people. But what I found as I wrote it is, number one, my life is only partially business. The best part of my life is my family and my marriage, right? And that's the best part of my life. So the book started morphing into how do you live an intentional life in everything you do? Because it was easy for people, and I've read about people that have said, here's how I make $1 million in business and here I do this. That is not the purpose of my book. My purpose of the book is how do I live an intentional life where I actually have a good, well-balanced life in everything I do? And when I thought about that, I thought about, people that are starting their career to, before they end their career. And I don't think a lot of people are very, I'll use the word purposeful again, but I don't think people are purposeful about and intentional about everything they do in their life. And I fortunately learned at a very early age that if I wanted to have success, and by the way, I don't measure success by material wealth, even though I've achieved material wealth, I've measured success by the joy I've had and the marriage I've had and a family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the book started actually taking a lot more meaning onto me as I started writing it than it did when I started it. And matter of fact, it became a lot better book halfway through it because I actually changed. It started as Aim for the Uprights, and it became Aim for the Uprights, the intentional playbook in faith, family, and business, because I realized that there were so many more elements in my life that I need to talk about intentionality.
And in case you noticed the cover art for the podcast, it says "Living a Life on Purpose."
Yes,
which is and actually, it's funny because our original tagline was kind of more along the lines of "You got rich, now what?"
right.
Because when you chase the money, at the end you realize, that didn't give me everything that I really wanted, and so that's a big part of it. It's funny, you talked about how you kind of changed going through writing the book. Now that you've written the book and you've published it and you've started to get out and talk about it, is there anything that's kind of surprised you after the fact or comments that have come back?
I tell you, the most pleased I've been, did not write this book, number one, to make money. And I think anybody that's become an author, you don't write a book to make money. Very few authors make money in books. What I have been most pleased about on this is originally I sent it, before it went on Amazon, I got 100 copies sent to me. And so we sent to friends and families. And one of the most touching things of all is my wife's very best friend read the book, and she's been my friend now for 40 some odd years. I've married 40 years. She's my friend for 40 years. Um, the amount of impact that it had on people that I didn't think it would have on, that is probably the greatest joy. The note I received from her after she finished the book, and she actually outlined it for me. And Stu, I never thought about this. And Stu, thank you for sharing this. And Stu, boy, I wish I would have known this when I was, 40 years old, because, she's in her 60s now. Those things were surprises to me and made the effort. If I never sold a book, which fortunately I have, but if I had never sold a book, it would have still made it worth my while because the impact I've had on some people actually very close to me. It is very nice.
It's kind of surprising, though, because I would have thought, being that they were close friends, they would have noticed this along the way.
Well, funny you say that. I think she admired our family, but my wife and I have lived overseas quite a bit. Much of our life was lived away from friends and family. I would say most of our life up until the last 10 years. The people that we were, her roommate from college, let's use that as an example. We saw her 2-3 times a year. Best friend, because I was living in New Zealand, or I was living in Chicago, or I was living in St. Louis or Kansas City, or I can go on and on, Miami. I mean, I've lived everywhere. And I think that's why, because she saw me on snippets of time, but she never really had a chance to get to know me really well, because it was a weekend here, a weekend there, and a weekend every weekend. Somebody when you spend weekends with me, you don't know people really, really well. She knew my wife, but she didn't really know me until, it was later in life. So I think that was meaningful. And even, and actually, and I will say this, I think sometimes we're private in our lives, and I kind of opened up the kimono and was very, very, I shared a lot of stuff that many people wouldn't share in a book. And so that, that made me a little vulnerable, right? Because I shared some things that a lot of people didn't know about me, and she knew those things. She knew me well enough to know. But a lot of people who knew me just through work didn't know a lot of things that I shared in this book that helped me live that intentional life and helped me deal through difficulties. I think when I think about life, it's not the person with the most wins that gets into heaven. When you think about life, I'm guessing, Rocky, you've had some ups and downs in your life. Not everything's been perfect, right? Would that be fair?
That's fair. Do you want me to read this quote? Because I think it goes right to it.
Please do.
Often we set specific goals or have certain expectations only to find ourselves falling short. However, it's in these moments of not getting what we wanted that we truly learn and grow.
Amen. That just summarized everything I was saying. And
that's from the book.
Yeah, exactly. And I wrote the book.
Everyone else doesn't know that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's fair enough. But in saying that's how listen, I don't know how you define success. I define success a lot differently than a lot of people. But if I was to define success for my life, much of it came from because, I had injuries and I went through a divorce at a very early age. And I had a wife that had cancer, and we had to go through that, and had a son that played professional baseball and got addicted to painkillers because he had his 4th arm surgery. And all these things that I went through, Rocky, actually made me a better human being. At the time, it was rough going through it, but I became a better human being as a result of that. So I think that's it. When I get to the finish line, I think there's a lot of obstacles that I got through to get to the finish line that made it meaningful. And thank you for sharing that quote, because that's one of my favorite quotes in the book, actually.
I very much enjoyed it. That's why I wrote it down. And I don't know how you define finish line, but for me, that's death. It's not retirement or
it's death.
Something in between.
No, because we're not finished until we're dead. So finish line for me is death.
And that's some people die while living, I guess.
Well, and there's people that live to retire. You and I talked briefly, and I'm not living to retire. I am absolutely not living to retire. I'm living to live. And, I was put in this earth to make a difference in this world, as all of us were, by the way. I'm not unique. I'm one of 6 billion people that was asked to make a difference. But I'm not working. If I was working to retire, both you and I retired at 53 once. I retired for 3 weeks. I don't know how long you retired for, but and then I sold the business and could have retired again. Didn't do that. I'm CEO again of a new company as of 7 weeks ago because I'm just not ready to hang up the cleats, right? And I probably never will, but I'll be active doing something until I'm actually pushing tulips.
And I am the same way. And the more I do it, the more I want to do it,
Right.
and the more I enjoy it. And if I don't like a part of it, then I get rid of that part.
Sure.
And
Sure.
I get someone else to do it, or we just don't do it, or I just don't fuss over it and I don't care. And
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
We do it on our own terms.
Absolutely.
Being a leader and being a CEO, I know you talked a little bit in the book about what employees want. And you listed 4 things. Listen to me, encourage me, give me a chance to succeed, and show me that leadership has my back. I don't know how often we treat employees that way.
Yeah.
What
The
have you
one
found?
Well, the only thing good about being old, and I know I'm a few years older than you, is I have, 42 years worth of wisdom from business. And every time I take a new CEO job, and I'm in my 5th now, um, I do what's called a listening tour. And I literally don't make decisions as a leader. Every time you come into a company, pretty soon that something's got to be changed, right? You're either a CEO because somebody got fired, somebody retired, somebody quit, but usually there's something you've got to go in and fix. At least every job I've come into, I've had to fix something. But I never fix anything until I listen. And when I say listen, I go out in the field and I'm talking to the folks that are in the grind and the grit every day. I'm talking to the corporate staff and listening. If we did a lot more as leaders of listen than we did talk, we'd be a heck of a lot better leaders in this world. But a lot of people like to hear themselves talk, and I think we've got a lot of great examples of that people love to hear themselves talk. I don't love to hear myself talk. I love to listen to people and learn about them. And one other thing I would say, and it's implied, and I talk about this in those 4 points under listening, is the first time I meet a teammate, I typically don't ask about business. The first time I meet a teammate, I ask about their family. I ask about what's important to them because I can't be a great leader until I know what motivates and drives my teammates. And so I would tell anybody I know that I work with that I just know barely, I can tell you who their wife is or their partner is, or if they're not married, their friends and what's important to them. Is it their dog? Is it their cat? Or is it their golf game? Or whatever. Those are the things that really matter because that's when people want to work for a leader, when they know you genuinely care about them as a human being and not just somebody to help them make next year's bonus, right? And I truly care about people as human beings. That's a genuine thing. So it's actually easy for me to do that because when you care about people, you then have empathy for people and you start making a difference in people's lives. And that's why ultimately we all work so that we can, make a better life for ourselves and our families.
I was always amazed at the big companies that would bring in consultants to tell them what to do instead of listening to their frontline workers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've worked for the 8th largest company in the world, and I've worked for, I guess, 3 Fortune 500 companies. Actually, I've worked for 3 Fortune 100 companies. We do as companies, we like to bring McKinsey or PwC, whoever it is, into our companies, and they tell us how we can be much smarter. And you're right. If we just listen a little more and ask a little more questions, I'm not a big listen. There's a need for consultants. I've hired consultants and I've used consultants when I need them. But a lot of times, if we just ask the people around us, we can save a lot of money from having to bring a consultant in because they're going to tell us the exact same thing that consultant did when they go out and ask all those questions. They put their great bubble charts and their great PowerPoints together to tell us what they learned.
Funny how that is. How does trust fit into all of this?
Well, I have a philosophy on trust, and my philosophy is not the same as everybody else's. I found out later. But, and so let me give you an idea. When I took this job 7 weeks ago, I had my first staff meeting, and it was with everybody in the corporate office. And I said, let's talk about my core values. And I said, one of my core values is trust. I said, I trust every one of you in here. I don't know you, but you're starting off having my trust. And the only way I'm not going to continue to trust me if you give me a reason not to trust you. A lot of people, you have to earn their trust. I don't think that's a leadership style that I can live by. Because if you have to earn somebody's trust, it may be 6 months from now that you know them well enough. If you give people trust, they'll want to run over the hill and take the hill for you because you're telling them up front that I believe in you. right? And so I give trust rather than it has to be earned. And that has been my philosophy ever since I was an actual leader. And once again, not everybody is like me, but it certainly has worked for me in my career.
And you have to do what works for you. It sounds like a lot of the way you live is in alignment with your core values.
Listen, every way I live is aligned with my core values. And let me explain what that means. So on my tombstone, I hope somebody says Stu Crum was a man of character and lived a life in integrity. If that was on my tombstone, I would be a happy person. And here's why I say that is I love winning. I'm a competitor. You're an athlete too. So most athletes love to win. But I will tell you, I won't win at the expense of cheating. I won't win at the expense of not doing it the right way. And let me give you a great example. The reason I love the sport of golf is because it's called a gentleman's sport. Or let's call it a gentle lady sport, but it's called a gentleman's sport, right? It's because your ball may be in a bad lie, and there may be nobody looking around you, and you can move that ball. That would be cheating. That'd be cheating, right? We can't do that in golf. You hit the ball where it lies, whether it's a good lie or a bad lie. That's the way it is. Well, I use that illustration for a lot of things in life. There's a lot of things in life where I can cheat customers to make more money. I can do all kinds of things. But if that's what I have to do to make money, then count me out, because I'm not going to do that at the expense of anybody, right? So that's my integrity. Do what you say and say what you do. And do it when no one's listening and no one's watching. I think that's even more important. So do it when no one's watching. I think that's a true sign of integrity and character. And so I have truly, since I've been a young adult, and I would say 18, 19 years old is really when I started kind of living this life of character and integrity and really being important to me. I have tried to put everything through those filters before I make a decision. And if I can't feel that people will say that that's not something of integrity, I simply won't do it. I just darn right won't do it. And that may cost me in the end, but it may cost me money, it may cost me position, but it won't cost me my character. And that's the only thing, I can take to my grave, right? So
It is. And I will say, when I play golf, there are no good lies and bad lies. And it's basically because it doesn't,
yeah.
who knows what's going to happen when I hit that ball.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that would be true for about 95% of the people that pick up a golf club. So in fairness, you're right. But
Yeah.
but really, when you watch the pros play, they hit from where the ball is, right? That's how and that's the way the game was designed to be played. That's really the way life's designed to be played. There's people that have made, and we know people, by the way, that have made millions, if not billions of dollars the wrong way. I mean, some of those are dealing drugs and doing it really illegally, and they have big houses and drive nice cars, but so what? I'm going to do it the right way. Whether that makes me rich or makes me poor, I'm going to do it the right way.
I appreciate that. So and we've kind of touched on it, but how does spirituality fit into all of this?
Well, it fits in a big way. The name of my book is Aim for the Uprights, the intentional playbook in faith, family, and business. And faith is the one common denominator in everything I do. I have a faith. I tell people I try to walk my talk daily. I'm not a Sunday Christian. I'm an everyday, right? And my faith happens to be Christian. It could be Jewish. It could be Buddhist. It could be a lot of things. But I happen to have a Christian faith. But it is not a Sunday faith. I'm the same person on Sunday as I am on Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday night. Right? There's many, I don't want to call friends, there's many people I know that they lead great lives, everything but a Friday night. And Friday night, they just let it all go. Well, and that's okay to a degree. I don't mind people letting it go as long as it's not hurting other people or doing things that are illegal, right? So, yeah, faith is the true driver of my life, and the principles of that faith. Now, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not steal. Right? I mean, I'm not going to go through the 10 Commandments, but they're not, to me, they're not the 10 suggestions. They're the 10 Commandments. And they never were they, at some point in my life, there were 10 suggestions. They became the 10 Commandments when I actually understood them. And so I try to live by the 10 Commandments, not 10 suggestions. So, yeah.
And I don't think we've talked about this in a long, long time, but that was my original thing when I talked about spirituality is, make sure you understand the tenets of your spirituality and make sure you're actually living in accordance with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, know what it is you believe and then believe in what you believe and make it your actions in
Right.
everything you do. And that's how you truly live by whatever code you've picked. Make sure you're actually doing it.
Yeah, you're being true to yourself. Rocky, I love that you just said
Mhm.
that. Because I'm not, listen, number of really close friends that are not, don't have the Christian faith that I have. They may have a faith and it may be a different faith than me, but I'm looking, but as I look at their lives, I look at those things. If they tell me one thing, they live something different, in my mind, they're a hypocrite, right? And same thing for me, by the way. I expect people to do the same thing to me. If Stu says one thing and absolutely does it different, he treats people different at work, then he says he wants to treat people, then I'm kind of a hypocrite. Not kind of, I am a hypocrite. And who wants to be part of that faith, right? Who wants to be that guy that says one thing and lives something else? I know I don't want to be in that religion. So it drives everything I do.
And the other thing, because we do talk about money, is you've actually been able to have both, right? You've had money, you've had time, you've had
Hmm.
family, you've had faith. You've been able to figure out a way, put it all together, works in alignment with who you choose to be.
Yeah, and I think there's people out there that probably think you can't,
Hmm.
say, well, I'm chasing. I heard this a lot growing up. Well, I'm going to kill myself and bust my butt until I make my first millions of dollars, and then I'll have time for family and everything. Well, I've been very fortunate, very blessed over my life. By the world's terms, I'm rich. Even by American terms, I'm rich. But that is not that. But I will tell you, my wife and I have a saying: "What flows in should flow out." So if I am rich, I would also like on my epitaph or my tombstone is probably one of the things. Has character, Stu has integrity, and Stu is generous. Because if I'm not generous with my wealth, if I'm driving expensive sports cars and living in a big house and buying diamonds for my wife, and I'm not helping out that family from Afghanistan that just came to the United States after helping the United States, and I'm giving true life examples, or helping that young lady in the inner city that needed a little help with financing, whatever it is, that my wife and I have been very purposeful in doing, then why have the wealth? Because I will tell you that, you and I both agreed that it ends on the day we die. I don't get a trophy for having a Porsche and a 12,000 square foot house, right? I think I get my trophy um, from being generous to strangers and helping people out and being a good father and being a good husband. And I think that's where my rewards are going to come at the very end. It's not because I've got a bigger, shinier blank than you do. Because honestly, back to my faith, God doesn't care. He just cares about my heart, doesn't care about my wealth. And if he cares about my wealth, he wants to make sure that I'm using my wealth to help others. Period, paragraph. So, yeah, it's kind of where I draw the line.
And that makes a lot of sense to me. Did you imagine that this is where you'd be in your 60s as far as
Uh,
attitude, mindset, activity level, and so forth?
no, no. I want to tell you that I've led an intentional life from the time I was probably 13 years old is when I really had a purpose. Now, that first purpose started off as being a professional football player, right? But here's what I would say. I dreamed of having this life, but I didn't dream big enough. In other words, I have, in the right way, I have exceeded my expectations for my life in having a 40-year marriage to the woman of my dreams. Right? It's my marriage is better than it would have thought it would be. My children are cooler than I thought they would be. My grandkids, and anybody that's got grandchildren knows they're the greatest things since sliced bread. My grandkids are the coolest. I've got to do things I didn't think to. So, but but I think I achieved these things once again by the intentionality that I started very early on in my life. I think I was able to achieve, if you call this success, and one last story. My father-in-law, who's been passed now for a number of years, was an inner city minister for 55 years. I think he made $24,000 when he retired. He was never rich, but he was one of the most successful men I ever met my entire life because he literally gave to the alcoholics. He went into the inner city and worked with the people that just didn't have anything. That is success for me, right? So I define success in different ways, but let's just to finalize your question. I've been blessed far beyond what I thought I would be in my 60s, unquestionably.
And as I approach, I start to realize that there's a lot of life left.
Yes,
and
yes.
and you can go the distance. And as part of that, probably for the last 10 plus years, I've been focused on health and activity to prevent decay
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that I will physically and mentally be strong as I get older so that I can continue to do things, because I don't want to be the guy with the walker. I want to be the guy who can still run and lift and do the work, regardless of where I am in that age.
Absolutely. You know what the encouraging thing is? My father, who's 92, my mother, who's 90, my father walks 5 miles a day. My mother
Mm-hmm.
walks with him 5 miles a day with the dog. They go by the golf course. They pick up golf balls that shankers like you and I hit that they find. And he actually just literally, right before this podcast, sent a picture. There's 4 boys in my family. He sent a picture of 4 bowls that are full of golf balls that he has found. We call him the GOAT for finding golf balls. And it's because, he's never been to Walker. Matter of fact, he drives 20,000 miles a year and he's 92 years old. You and I are at that same thing. I hope that's me 28 years from now. I hope that's me 28 years from now.
And that's the goal. Set the sights, do the work, and hopefully it gets there. Is there anything else in the book that we should have talked about and we didn't get a chance to?
You did a pretty good job of covering what I would call, the main themes of the book. I want people, if people choose to buy this book, I want them to know that what they're getting into, and they're getting into a book that helps people think. Listen, I have 18 chapters. They're personal stories that end with a real live, here's how you can lead an intentional life, really. At the end of each chapter, there's actually kind of a lesson. It could almost be, read a chapter a day, and at the end of it, think about, man, am I doing this? Am I not doing that? That's the intentional playbook. That's the intentional aspect of this book. And, I said this earlier, whether I sell 1 or 1 million books, and I won't sell a million books, but wish I would. But how many books I end up selling, if I can just have one person walk away with a nugget that they've learned from these 18 chapters, it was well worth the cost of writing it, because it's very expensive. If you self-publish, which I did, I had to buy the books and send them to Amazon, right? So it's not cheap doing this. But I will feel like I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Living by faith. Pretty simple. I have a faith that drives everything I do, and my faith has allowed me to live an intentional life. Amen.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you'd have learned sooner?
Learn to think before you speak. I hear very early in my career, probably through my mid-30s, if I heard something, I reacted to it. Bad idea. I now have a 10-second rule that before I say anything that might get me in trouble or the people around me in trouble, I think before I act. So clearly the 10-second rule.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Don't compromise the values that are the most important to you. Just simply determine what's important to you in your life at 18 years old, and live to those moral values / principles. Don't compromise.
And you've got to define them, right?
You're right. You absolutely have to define them first. But once you define them, because what I have found over and over, and good thing about being old, Rocky, is I do a lot of mentoring now, because I have gray hair, right? And I've got wisdom that I didn't used to have 30 years ago. And what I have found is people are very apologetic about the things they've done and regret many of the things they've done. Well, it's because they were committed to one thing, but they couldn't live by that principle. And they actually broke their own commitment to themselves. Don't do it. You can say no. You can say yes to the right things. It can be done.
It can. And you have to choose and be intentional about that.
That's right.
If people would like to learn more about you in the book, what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, 2 ways. If they want to buy the book, they can just go on Amazon.com and just Google Aim for the Uprights by Stu Crum, Stucrum, and they'll be able to find the book. You can read reviews on it. I think I've got a number of 5-star reviews. Fortunately, that's probably my mother, my father, and my brothers. But actually, the reviews, I don't recognize the names on them, so it's none of my family members. And if you want to learn more about me, I did create a website, stucrum.com. And you can see pictures of the family and a little bit of my life and some of my principles. And if you want to reach out to me, you can talk to me through it too, because there's a little place where you can send me a note and I'll read it. So that'd be the best place.
And we'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's truly been my honor and my pleasure, Rocky, to be on your show. Thank you very much.
Thanks for checking out this unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can find the full episode along with all the back episodes at richersoul.com. This podcast is brought to you by Profit Comes First, where we help business owners to have a more profitable and growing business so they can live the life of their dreams. Check that out as well wherever you listen to all this content.